The gunshot echoed through the Montana wilderness, startling a flock of birds into flight as Dominic Forrester pulled back on his horse's reins. The year was 1878, and the vast expanse of untamed territory stretched before him like an endless sea of possibility. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, putting distance between himself and the bounty hunters who'd been trailing him since Deadwood. Not that he was guilty of anything worse than winning too much at cards, but some men took losing poorly, especially when whiskey was involved. The smell hit him first. Ash and char carried on the breeze, the unmistakable scent of disaster. Dominic adjusted his worn leather hat and urged his horse toward the rising tendrils of smoke that curled against the setting sun. As he crested the hill, the remains of a homestead came into view. The house, what was left of it, still smoldered, blackened timber jutting toward the sky like accusing fingers. He dismounted cautiously, hand hovering near his revolver. Raiders weren't uncommon in these parts, and they sometimes circled back to their destruction. The ground was soft beneath his boots as he approached, scanning for signs of danger. That's when he heard it, a gentle melody carried on the evening air, a woman's voice, sweet and sorrowful, singing a lullaby he half remembered from his own childhood. Dominic moved around the ruins of the house toward the sound. She sat with her back against a lone oak tree that had somehow been spared from the fire. A small child no more than 4 years old curled against her chest. Her dress was smudged with soot, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around a face streaked with tears and ash. Despite everything, her voice remained steady as she sang, fingers gently stroking the sleeping child's hair. Dominic stepped on a twig, and the snap caused her to jerk her head up, eyes wide with terror. In one fluid motion, she pulled a small revolver from the folds of her dress and aimed it directly at his chest. "I don't have anything left for you to take," she said, her voice trembling despite the steadiness of her hand. Dominic raised both hands slowly. "I'm not here to take anything, madam. I saw the smoke. Thought someone might need help." Her eyes, a startling shade of green, narrowed as she studied him. The child stirred against her but didn't wake. "I've had my fill of men offering help," she replied bitterly. Dominic nodded, understanding more than she knew. "May I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the ground a respectful distance away. After a long moment, she lowered the gun slightly and gave a curt nod. Dominic eased himself down, removing his hat and placing it beside him. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25, with a delicate beauty that even grief and exhaustion couldn't diminish. "My name is Dominic Forrester," he offered. "I was passing through on my way to Helena." The woman hesitated. "Victoria Sutton," she finally said, "and this is my daughter, Emma." "What happened here, Mrs. Sutton, miss," she corrected automatically. "They came this morning, 6 men, said my brother owed them money." Her voice was flat, as if she'd gone beyond emotion. "Thomas wasn't even here. He's been gone 2 years now, off seeking his fortune in California. I told them that, but they didn't believe me, or didn't care." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Your husband?" Victoria's gaze dropped to the child in her arms. "There is no husband, not anymore. Jack died of fever last winter." "I'm sorry." The simple words hung in the air between them. After a moment, Victoria resumed her song, a soft, mournful tune that seemed to blend with the gathering dusk. Without thinking, Dominic hummed along, remembering fragments of the melody from long ago. Victoria's voice faltered and she looked at him in surprise. "My mother used to sing that," he explained with a small smile, "when I was about your daughter's age." Something in her posture softened slightly. It was the only thing that would calm Emma after. She gestured toward the smoldering ruins. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of her tragedy settling between them like a physical presence. "You can't stay here," Dominic finally said. Victoria's eyes flashed. "I have nowhere else to go. There's a town about 15 miles west. Silver Creek. Not much, but they have a hotel." "I have no money, Mr. Forrester. They took everything of value before they set the fire." Dominic considered this. He wasn't a wealthy man, far from it, but he had enough to get her somewhere safe. Besides, the thought of leaving a woman and child alone beside the ashes of their home didn't sit right with him. "I can help with that, at least enough to get you settled somewhere." Victoria studied him warily. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question. Men in these parts rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. Dominic thought about it, then shrugged. "Because someone should," he said simply. As the last light faded from the sky, they made a small camp beneath the oak tree. Dominic built a fire, careful to keep it small enough not to draw attention but sufficient to ward off the night's chill. He shared his provisions, jerky, hardtack, and coffee, watching as Victoria coaxed her daughter to eat a few bites before the child drifted back to sleep. "She's beautiful," Dominic said softly, nodding toward Emma, whose blonde curls caught the firelight. Victoria's smile was tinged with sadness. "She has her father's eyes." "How long were you married?" "5 years. We met when I was 17. He was passing through my hometown in Illinois, working as a farrier. I thought he hung the moon." She poked at the fire with a stick. "We came out here because land was cheap. Jack had dreams of raising horses." Dominic listened as she spoke, piecing together the story of a young couple chasing the promise of the West, only to have those dreams crushed by the harsh realities of frontier life. It was a familiar tale one he'd seen play out countless times across the territories. "What about you, Mr. Forrester? What brings you to these parts?" Dominic hesitated. His story wasn't one he shared readily. "Just looking for a fresh start." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "Running from something, then?" He chuckled despite himself. "You're direct, Miss Sutton." "Life out here doesn't leave much room for pleasantries." "Fair enough." He took a sip of coffee. "I got into some trouble in Deadwood. Nothing serious, a misunderstanding over cards, but the men involved have connections. Thought it best to make myself scarce for a while." "So you're a gambler?" "Sometimes. I've been a lot of things. Rancher, scout, even tried my hand at prospecting for a spell. None of it quite stuck." Victoria considered this. "A man without roots." "I suppose you could say that." The conversation lulled as they both stared into the fire. Dominic was acutely aware of her presence, the gentle curve of her profile against the darkness, the way she unconsciously stroked her daughter's hair. It had been a long time since he'd sat in the company of a woman like Victoria Sutton, one with quiet strength and dignity despite her circumstances. Morning came with a chill that penetrated Dominic's bones. He woke to find Victoria already up, washing her daughter's face with water from his canteen. Emma, fully awake now, watched him with solemn blue eyes. "Good morning," he said, offering the child a smile. She ducked behind her mother's skirts. "She's shy around strangers," Victoria explained, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Emma, say hello to Mr. Forrester. He's going to help us get to town." The little girl peeked out. "Hello," she whispered. Dominic tipped an imaginary hat. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Emma." That earned him the faintest of smiles before she hid her face again. They broke camp quickly, Victoria insisting on searching through the cooled remains of the house for anything salvageable. She emerged with a small cloth bundle, a family Bible, a tarnished locket, and a charred wooden toy horse. "That's all that's left," she said, her voice hollow. Dominic helped her mount his horse, placing Emma in front of her, then took the reins and began leading them westward. The journey would take most of the day on foot, but the horse couldn't carry all three of them for any distance. As they traveled, Emma gradually warmed to him, asking questions about his horse and the various wildlife they encountered. Victoria remained more reserved, though Dominic occasionally caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. By midday, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Dominic frowned at the sky. "Storm's coming. We need to find shelter." Victoria scanned the landscape. "There," she said, pointing to a rocky outcropping in the distance. They reached the natural shelter just as the first heavy drops began to fall. The outcropping formed a shallow cave, enough to keep them dry but requiring them to sit close together. Emma, excited by the thunder, clapped her hands with each boom while Victoria tensed beside Dominic. "Not fond of storms?" he asked. She shook her head. "They always made me nervous even as a child. Jack used to tease me about it." The rain fell in sheets, creating a curtain of water at the cave's entrance. Dominic found himself telling stories to distract both Emma and Victoria, tales of his travels, carefully edited to be suitable for young ears. "You've been everywhere," Emma said, wide-eyed. Dominic laughed. "Not quite everywhere, but I've seen my share of this country." "Don't you get lonely?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Always moving from place to place," the question caught him off guard. "I suppose I do at times, but I've never been good at staying put." "Why not?" Dominic was silent for a moment, watching the rain. "My father was a hard man," he finally said. "Believed in discipline above all else. After my mother died, there wasn't much warmth in our house. I left when I was 16 and never looked back." Victoria's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." Emma, growing restless, began to explore the small cave. Victoria kept a watchful eye on her as she continued the conversation. "So you've never thought of settling down, finding a place to call home?" Dominic shrugged. "Can't miss what you've never had." "I don't believe that," Victoria said quietly. "Everyone needs somewhere to belong." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding that left Dominic feeling strangely exposed. The storm passed by late afternoon, leaving the world washed clean and the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. They resumed their journey, making good time on the muddy trail. As dusk approached, the lights of Silver Creek appeared in the distance. It was a small settlement, one main street flanked by the usual establishments: a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and a handful of houses. Not much, but a sight for sore eyes after their journey. The Silver Creek Hotel was a two-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The proprietor, a round woman named Mrs. Hollister, took one look at Victoria's ash-stained dress and Emma's exhausted face and immediately bustled them inside, clucking sympathetically. "You poor dears. What on earth happened to you?" Dominic explained briefly while Victoria sank gratefully into a chair in the small lobby, Emma half asleep in her lap. "Raiders," Mrs. Hollister said, shaking her head. "Getting worse every year. Law can't keep up with them all." She turned to Victoria. "Don't you worry, honey. We'll get you set up with a room and a hot meal." Dominic paid for a week's lodging and requested a bath be drawn for Victoria and Emma. Mrs. Hollister gave him an approving nod before leading the pair upstairs. Left alone, Dominic crossed the street to the saloon. He needed a drink and time to think. He hadn't planned on stopping in Silver Creek, and he certainly hadn't planned on taking responsibility for a woman and child. Yet here he was. The saloon was like every other frontier establishment he'd frequented: smoky, loud, and populated by a mix of locals and drifters. Dominic ordered whiskey and found a corner table where he could observe the room. "You're new," said a voice beside him. A man in a sheriff's badge pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. "Passing through," Dominic nodded cautiously. "Just arrived, planning to rest a few days." I'm Sheriff Daniel Porter. The man extended a hand. We like to know who's in our town. Dominic shook it. Dominic Forrester. Traveling alone. No, I'm accompanying a woman and her daughter. Their homestead was burned by raiders yesterday. The sheriff's expression darkened. Where? About 15 miles east, near the ridge. Damn, that's the third attack this month. They're getting bolder. Porter signaled for a drink. The woman, she have a name, Victoria Sutton. Her husband died last winter. She was alone with her daughter when they came. Porter nodded thoughtfully. Sutton, don't know the name, must be newcomers. He studied Dominic. How'd you come to be helping them? Dominic explained briefly, aware that the sheriff was assessing him, looking for inconsistencies. Well, it's good you came along when you did, Porter finally said. Too many folks would have ridden on past. He rose to leave. How long you planning to stay in Silver Creek, Mr. Forrester? Not sure yet. Depends on how quickly Miss Sutton gets on her feet, the sheriff nodded. Fair enough. Just keep your nose clean while you're here. After finishing his drink, Dominic returned to the hotel. Mrs. Hollister informed him that Victoria and Emma were already asleep after their bath and meal. Poor things were exhausted, she said. But they'll be right as rain after a good night's rest. I've put you in the room across the hall. Dominic thanked her and headed upstairs. As he passed Victoria's door, he paused, struck by a sudden wave of protectiveness. He'd done what he could for now, but what would happen to them when he moved on? The thought troubled him more than he cared to admit. The next morning, Dominic was drinking coffee in the hotel's small dining room when Victoria appeared, wearing a plain but clean dress that must have been loaned by Mrs. Hollister. Her hair was neatly pinned up, and without the layer of ash and exhaustion, her beauty was even more striking. Good morning, she said, taking the seat across from him. Emma's still sleeping. Mrs. Hollister said she'd keep an ear out for her so I could come down. You look better, Dominic said, then immediately felt foolish for stating the obvious. Victoria gave him a small smile. Amazing what soap and rest can do. She poured herself coffee. I wanted to thank you properly, Mr. Forrester. What you did for us taking in strangers, bringing us here, not many would have been so kind. Dominic, please, and there's no need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said firmly. They wouldn't have. I know that better than most. There was a story there, but Dominic didn't press. Instead, he asked, what will you do now? Victoria's hands tightened around her cup. I don't know. I have some skills sewing, cooking. Perhaps Mrs. Hollister would hire me to help around the hotel until I can save enough to move on. To where? I have an aunt in Denver. She wrote last year after Jack died, offering us a place to stay, but I was too proud to accept then. She sighed. Pride doesn't seem as important now. Dominic nodded. Denver was a long way off, but it was a solid plan. I can help you get there, he said before he could think better of it. Victoria's eyes widened. I couldn't ask that of you. You didn't ask, I offered. Why? Her gaze was direct, challenging. Dominic wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. Let's just say I know what it's like to be alone in the world. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's arrival, escorted by Mrs. Hollister. The child looked transformed, her hair neatly braided, wearing a dress that was slightly too large but clean and whole. Mama, she exclaimed, rushing to Victoria. Mrs. Hollister gave me a ribbon. I see that, Victoria said, smiling genuinely for the first time since Dominic had met her. It's very pretty. Breakfast was a lively affair with Emma chattering about the hotel's cat and the view from their window. Dominic found himself enjoying the domesticity of the scene, so different from his usual solitary meals. After breakfast, Dominic visited the general store to purchase supplies. He was aware that his funds were dwindling, but he couldn't leave Victoria and Emma without necessities. He selected practical items, clothing for both of them, toiletries, a small doll for Emma. As he was paying, the shopkeeper mentioned that the local sawmill was looking for workers. "Good pay for honest work," the man said, "if you're planning to stay a while." Dominic thanked him for the information, turning the idea over in his mind. He hadn't planned on staying in Silver Creek, but a few weeks of work would replenish his funds and give Victoria time to find her footing. When he returned to the hotel with his purchases, Victoria was visibly overwhelmed. "This is too much," she protested. "I can't accept all this." "You can," he said firmly, "and you will, for Emma's sake if not your own." The mention of her daughter crumbled Victoria's resistance. "I'll pay you back, somehow." "No need," Dominic hesitated. "I'm thinking of staying in town for a while, the sawmill's hiring. It would give you time to decide what's best for you and Emma." Victoria studied him. "Why would you do that? You barely know us." Dominic couldn't explain the pull he felt toward this woman and her child, the need to ensure their safety, to see them smile again. "Maybe I'm tired of drifting," he said instead. The days that followed fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Dominic secured work at the sawmill, discovering muscles he'd forgotten he had as he hauled lumber from dawn till dusk. Victoria found employment at the hotel, helping Mrs. Hollister with cleaning and cooking while Emma played under the watchful eyes of both women. In the evenings, they would often eat dinner together in the hotel dining room, sharing stories of their day. Dominic found himself looking forward to these moments, Emma's enthusiastic accounts of her adventures, Victoria's quiet observations, the way her face softened when she laughed. On Sundays, when the sawmill was closed, Dominic would take them on short excursions around Silver Creek. They explored the nearby stream where Emma collected smooth stones, picnicked in meadows dotted with wildflowers, and once rode his horse, all three of them precariously balanced, to a vista overlooking the valley. It was during one such outing, about 3 weeks after their arrival in Silver Creek, that something shifted between Dominic and Victoria. They were sitting by the stream, watching Emma wade in the shallows, when Victoria suddenly said, "You never told me why you really left Deadwood." Dominic glanced at her in surprise. "I told you, a disagreement over cards." Victoria shook her head. "There's more to it than that, I can tell." He sighed, plucking a blade of grass. "You're right. The card game was with a man named Walsh. Powerful man, owns half the businesses in Deadwood. He accused me of cheating." "Were you?" Dominic smiled faintly. "No, I didn't need to. He was drunk and careless." "So what happened?" He pulled a gun. "I was faster." Dominic paused. "I didn't kill him, but he won't be dealing cards for a while. His friends made it clear I should leave town while I could." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You're good with that gun, then? Good enough to stay alive? Is that why you really helped us? Because you know how to fight?" Dominic turned to look at her, struck by the genuine curiosity in her expression. "No, that had nothing to do with it." "Then why?" He considered the question, watching Emma splash in the water. "When I found you singing to her beside that burned house, it reminded me of something I lost a long time ago, something I didn't even know I missed until that moment." "What was that?" "Connection," he said simply. "To someone, to somewhere." Victoria's hand found his, her fingers cool against his calloused palm. "I understand that feeling." The touch was fleeting. She withdrew her hand almost immediately, but it left Dominic's skin tingling. He looked at her, noticing the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the curve of her lips as she smiled at her daughter. Something was growing between them, something unexpected and fragile. Dominic recognized it with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He'd never allowed himself to form attachments, knowing his nomadic lifestyle made them impossible. Yet here he was, day by day putting down roots in a town he'd never meant to stay in. As the weeks passed, Dominic found himself spending most of his free time with Victoria and Emma. The little girl had taken to calling him Dom, and her face would light up whenever he appeared. Victoria, too, seemed to brighten in his presence, her initial wariness giving way to a warm familiarity that made his heart race. Silver Creek was buzzing with preparation for the annual Founders' Day celebration, a modest affair by city standards, but the highlight of the year for the small community. There would be food, music, dancing, and competitions of skill. "You should enter the shooting contest," Victoria suggested one evening as they walked back to the hotel after dinner at the town's only restaurant. Emma skipped ahead, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. Dominic shook his head. "I'd rather not draw attention to myself." Victoria gave him a knowing look. "You're worried about those men from Deadwood. It's been almost 2 months. They've probably forgotten about me by now. But you haven't forgotten about them." She was right, of course. Caution had kept him alive this long, and old habits were hard to break. Yet the longer he stayed in Silver Creek, the more he found himself imagining a different kind of life, one with permanence, with family. "Maybe I'll enter," he conceded, "if only to win the prize money for Emma's new shoes." Victoria smiled, her hand brushing against his as they walked. This time, she didn't pull away immediately, allowing their fingers to intertwine for a brief, electric moment. The day of the celebration dawned clear and warm. The town's main street had been transformed with bunting and lanterns, and tables laden with food lined the boardwalk. A platform had been erected for dancing, and a small band was setting up their instruments. Dominic met Victoria and Emma at the hotel. Victoria wore her best dress, a blue cotton that brought out the green of her eyes, and had arranged her hair with special care. Emma, excited beyond words, wore a new ribbon Dominic had bought her the previous day. "You both look beautiful," he said sincerely. Victoria blushed. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Forrester." He had, in fact, made an effort, shaving carefully, wearing his one good shirt, polishing his boots until they shone. The day passed in a blur of activities. Emma participated in children's games, winning a candy stick in a sack race. Victoria's apple pie earned second place in the baking contest, a fact she celebrated with mock indignation. "Mrs. Peterson has won 3 years running, apparently," she told Dominic. "Mrs. Hollister says it's because she's sweet on the judge." The shooting contest was held in the afternoon. Dominic, after much persuasion from both Victoria and Emma, had reluctantly entered. The competition involved hitting a series of increasingly difficult targets, culminating in a small metal star placed at a considerable distance. Dominic's years of relying on his marksmanship served him well. He progressed through the rounds with ease, his quiet focus a contrast to the showmanship of some competitors. In the final round, he was the last man standing, earning a modest cash prize and the admiration of the crowd. "I knew you could do it," Victoria said as he rejoined them, Emma dancing around him in excitement. "You were the best, Dom," the little girl exclaimed. "Even better than Sheriff Porter." Dominic caught the sheriff's good-natured grimace from across the street and tipped his hat in acknowledgement. As evening fell, lanterns were lit and the band struck up a lively tune. Couples took to the dance floor while children darted between the adults, playing their own games in the gathering darkness. "Will you dance with me?" Dominic asked Victoria, surprising himself with his boldness. Her eyes widened, but she nodded, turning to Mrs. Hollister, who was nearby. "Would you watch Emma for a few minutes?" "With pleasure," the older woman said, winking at Dominic. "You two go enjoy yourselves." On the dance floor, Victoria fit perfectly in his arms, her hand warm in his, her waist beneath his palm sending his pulse racing. They moved together as if they'd done this countless times before, finding a rhythm that matched the beat of their hearts. "I never thanked you properly," Victoria said softly as they swayed to the music, "for everything you've done for us." "There's no need." "Yes, there is," she interrupted. "You saved us, Dominic, not just from exposure or hunger but from despair. You gave us hope again." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. "You've given me something too," he admitted. "A reason to stay in one place, to think about tomorrow instead of just making it through today." Victoria's eyes searched his. "And is that what you want, to stay?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Dominic knew what she was really asking, not just about Silver Creek but about them, about the possibility of a future together. "I want," he began, but was interrupted by a commotion at the edge of the gathering. 4 men on horseback had ridden into town, dust-covered and grim-faced. Dominic recognized the leader instantly, Samuel Walsh, his arm still in a sling, his face twisted with malice as he scanned the crowd. "I need to go," Dominic said urgently, stepping back from Victoria. "Get Emma and go back to the hotel. Now." "What's wrong?" Victoria's voice was sharp with alarm. "Those men there from Deadwood, they're looking for me." Victoria's gaze darted to the newcomers, then back to Dominic, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You can't run. Not now." "I don't have a choice," he said, though the words felt hollow. "If I stay, they'll tear this town apart looking for me. People could get hurt." Her fingers tightened on his arm. "Or you could end this for good." "How?" "By not running." Victoria's voice was steady. "Sheriff Porter is right over there. Tell him what's happening." Dominic hesitated, torn between his instinct for self-preservation and the life he'd glimpsed with Victoria and Emma, a life worth fighting for. "Trust me," Victoria said, her eyes never leaving his. "Trust what we've built here." In that moment, Dominic realized he'd already made his choice weeks ago when he'd decided to stay in Silver Creek. He nodded once, then strode toward Sheriff Porter, who was already eyeing the newcomers with suspicion. "Those men are here for me," Dominic said without preamble. "Walsh claims I cheated him at cards in Deadwood. I didn't, but I did shoot him when he pulled a gun on me." Porter's expression remained impassive. "I suspected there was something in your past. You've proven yourself honest since you've been here, Forrester. I'll handle this." The sheriff stepped forward to intercept Walsh and his men before they could dismount. What followed was a tense conversation that Dominic couldn't hear, but he could see Walsh's face growing increasingly red with anger. Victoria appeared at Dominic's side. Emma clutched protectively to her skirts. "What's happening?" Porter's telling them to leave. "Will they?" "Not willingly." As if confirming his words, Walsh suddenly pushed past the sheriff, pointing directly at Dominic. "There he is, the cheating bastard who shot me." The celebration fell silent, all eyes turning to Dominic. "I didn't cheat," Dominic called clearly. "And I only shot you after you drew on me. Everyone in that saloon saw it." Walsh spat on the ground. "You're a dead man, Forrester." Sheriff Porter stepped between them. "Not in my town, he isn't. You want to press charges, do it legally. Otherwise, I suggest you move on." Walsh sneered. "You think you can stop all 4 of us, Sheriff?" "He's not alone," came a voice from behind Dominic. It was the foreman from the sawmill, and beside him stood several of Dominic's co-workers, their expressions resolute. More townspeople moved to stand with them, the general store owner, the barber, even Mrs. Hollister with her formidable presence. In the space of 2 months, without realizing it, Dominic had become one of them. They were standing with him not because they believed his story, but because he was now part of their community. Walsh surveyed the gathering crowd and seemed to deflate slightly, recognizing that he was outmatched. "This isn't over," he threatened, but there was less conviction in his voice. "Yes, it is," Sheriff Porter said firmly. "Unless you want to spend the night in my jail, I suggest you and your friends ride out now." For a tense moment, it seemed Walsh might choose conflict over retreat. But finally, with a last venomous glare at Dominic, he yanked his horse around and led his men out of town. The crowd dispersed slowly, the festive mood subdued but not entirely dispelled. The band hesitantly resumed playing and conversations gradually picked up again. Victoria's hand found Dominic's, squeezing tightly. "You stayed," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had something worth staying for." Emma tugged at his pant leg. "Are the bad men gone, Dom?" He knelt down to her level. "Yes, sweetheart, they're gone." "Good," she said decisively. "Because you promised to teach me to fish tomorrow." Dominic laughed, the tension of the confrontation draining away. "That I did." Later that night, after Emma had been tucked into bed, Dominic and Victoria stood on the hotel's back porch, looking up at the stars. The celebration had wound down, leaving the town peaceful once more. "You think they'll come back?" Victoria asked quietly. Dominic considered this. "They might, but not tonight and probably not alone next time. Walsh knows the town stands with me now." "What will you do?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "What I should have done weeks ago. Victoria, I've spent my whole life running from place to place, never letting myself get attached to anyone, until I found you and Emma." Victoria's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "And now? Now I want to stop running. I want to build something here with you if you'll have me. Are you proposing, Dominic Forrester?" Her voice was teasing, but he could hear the emotion beneath it. "I believe I am," he said, surprising himself with how right it felt. "I love you, Victoria." "And I love Emma. I know it's fast." "No," she interrupted, stepping closer. "It's not too fast, not when you know it's right." She reached up to touch his face. "I've loved you since that first night when you sat down beside us and hummed my mother's lullaby." Dominic pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find a home," he whispered, "much less a family." Victoria smiled, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "Sometimes home finds you when you least expect it." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Dominic and Victoria were married in Silver Creek's small church. Emma, radiant in a new dress, scattered wildflower petals down the aisle before them. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which lasted well into the night. With his sawmill earnings and Victoria's careful saving, they had purchased a small parcel of land just outside town. The new house, sturdy and built to withstand the elements, was completed just before the wedding, with help from many of the same townspeople who had stood with Dominic against Walsh. On their first night in the new home, after Emma had been put to bed in her own room for the first time, Dominic and Victoria sat on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, snuggling closer against the evening chill. "Who would have thought that the worst day of my life would lead me to you?" "Some things are just meant to be," Dominic said, thinking of how close he'd come to riding past that burned homestead, how different both their lives would have been if he hadn't heard her singing to her child in the gathering darkness. As if reading his thoughts, Victoria began to softly sing the lullaby that had first drawn them together. Dominic joined in, their voices blending in the quiet night, a promise of all the days and years to come. In the room above them, Emma slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that her family was whole, her home was safe, and tomorrow would bring another day of love and belonging. And for Dominic, The man who had never believed in putting down roots. Nothing had ever felt more right than this moment, this family, this home, this life they were building together. The cowboy who had found a mother singing to her child beside a burned house had found so much more. He had found his heart, his future, and at long last, his place in the world.